Hello, guys and gals, and this is part, checking real quick, 19 of our reading of Pandora's Genes. Now, as always, we're going to go over the copyright information, which should be right here. As it says right here, oops, there. Popular Library Edition, copyright 1985 by Kathryn Lance, all rights reserved. Cover art by David Mattingly. And I do have the author's written permission to read this book on my YouTube channel. So, in the last episode, we found out that Zach was indeed alive and had been for the last 5 years. He was just held captive by the traitors, it seems. Which was really kind of an interesting twist. Basically, you knew that Zach was alive, but you just didn't know how it was going to play out. So this should be really interesting. We're getting near the end of the book too, because we still have a little ways to go. We're on like page 200 of 280 some. 279. Okay. Anyways, so we're going to get right into this. Let's get the picture back. Okay. We're going to start with the previous paragraph. His heart thumped heavily as he remembered what his purpose had been, to deliver Evie safely to the garden. What had happened to her? No one had mentioned a young girl, and what about Oren? Had he gone after Evie on the mount? For a moment Zach thought he would be sick. Then there was nothing he could do for Evie now, but as soon as he was able, he would get away and find her, or avenge her if it came to that. In the meantime, he must be cautious and discover who these people were who had saved his life. The young man, Yash, seemed to wish him well, but there was something else going on beneath the surface. It seemed from the conversation that he was opposed somehow to the principal. Surely he couldn't still be loyal to the president, who had been deposed many years ago. Zach had heard talk of a ragged empire in the West, but in all these years there had been no contact with any Westerners but occasional nomadic traders. He concentrated again on the muttering voices, but before he could learn more, the need to cough overtook him. When he had finished, he groaned weakly, and almost immediately a hand was on his forehead. "I believe our guest is awake," the young man, Yash, was smiling down at him. "Jonna, do you think he needs to breathe the smoking herbs again?" "Perhaps," said the woman, "but he is very sleepy afterwards." Then after we talk," said Yash. "Do you think you can talk?" Zach nodded. Then, with effort, "I owe you my life. The body is its natural. The body in its natural wisdom heals," said the young man. "All we've done is help." "Thank you, nevertheless," said Zach. "Why?" He stopped. He had been about to ask why they had saved him, but wasn't sure he wanted to know. "I'm sure you have many questions," said Yash. "And so do we. We won't tire you. Only tell us who you are and where you are from." "My name is Zach, son of Ilona. I'm from the capital." "You've heard of it?" "We've heard of the capital," said Yash. His face changed subtly. The capital is a long way from here, friend," said the voice belonging to the man Yash had called Galen. "What are you doing this so far from home?" The man approached, and Zach could see that his face held a look the opposite of Yash's, guarded, unfriendly, and suspicious. Around his neck he wore a double spiral, identical to those worn by Yash and Jonah. I'm going to say that it's Jonna, but I'm going to say it's Jonah. "I was on business," said Zach. He hadn't the strength to think of a lie. "As we thought," said the man. "On business, perhaps, for the principal?" Zach groaned deliberately. The effort of talking had tired him, and he wanted to know more before he spoke again. "Answer me," said Galen. Yash put his hand on Galen's arm. "Wait," he said. "Zach. He is exhausted and sick. We'll talk with him later." Then, to Zach, "I think It would be best if Jonah treats you now, and you sleep. Perhaps you will find answers to some of your own questions in the morning, when we have our services." Zack nodded gratefully. He sensed that there was danger here, but for now he wanted only to rest. Galen turned away, but not without an unguarded, hostile glance, as if to say that he would get the information he wanted. Then the woman came over indifferently and began to prepare the burning herbs. Zack watched with interest as she mixed a small bundle of green leaves in a bowl, added a pinch of some dark powder, and crushed all together with a stone pestle. There must be new plants of some sort that promoted healing. He must find out what they were and deliver the information to the garden so they could study it and perhaps learn to use the plants to help all the people of the district. The memory of the garden stabbed through him like the pain in his chest, reminding him again of Evie and of the cold woman and of the old woman and the principal, and all he had left undone. When the woman had the herbs smoked and asked him to breathe, he welcomed the sharp fumes, knowing they would soon blot out his frustration and guilt. After a few moments, the woman left with Yosh and Galen. Zack tried to think, but his mind was tired. He fell asleep to the sound of many voices chanting. Chapter 2. Crudely hewn logs and dried evergreen branches were piled at the base of a large flat rock on which Yosh stood. Surrounding him, sitting, kneeling, some standing, were perhaps 40 shabbily dressed people, the men bearded and a few women with long, loose, unkempt hair. Zack lay propped on soft branches laid against the side of the tent, facing the rising sun behind the altar. The effort of being moved outside the tent had exhausted him, but he found his breathing was easier in this position, and that the air outside the tent was fresh and invigorating, as it had always been in this part of the country when he was a child. Yosh was leading the group in a low, monotonous chant. The words were murmured, almost mumbled, and Zack found it difficult to understand what was being said. Something about sheep, pastures, and a valley, which sounded vaguely familiar. The words did not seem coherently arranged, and Zack soon lost interest. Instead, he inspected the people who were gathered in the early morning ritual. They called themselves traders, Traders. Beyond this, Zack knew little. Religion, like almost all forms of civilization, had broken down after the change and survived only in very small pockets of the old Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. Most citizens of the district used the form of ancient rituals for marriage and burial, but there was little sense of religion as an underlying force of life. It was as if mankind had left itself so let down by all of its leaders and gods that it had finally decided to rely on itself alone. There was a terrible void in most lives, Zack knew, and he and Will had both been expecting a revival of religious forms. Perhaps it had finally happened with these traders. Perhaps a new religion would be good for the people of the district, adding a sense of stability to their precarious lives. The chanting seemed endless. The traders were more shabbily dressed than the general populace of the district, and much less kempt. This was understandable, however, given their obvious nomadic way of life. Since he himself could never return to the capital, Zack thought perhaps someday he would be able to receive news of Will through the traders, and perhaps to the kindly seeming Yosh could help him discover what had happened to Evie. As the sun fully topped the mountain, the chanting abruptly stopped, and Zack turned back to watch. Now Yosh began to speak to his congregation in low, urgent tones, making most of what he said was lost in the cool morning breeze, but Zack was startled to hear the word science several times. A group of men near the front of the congregation stood together, then laid a colored box on a pile of branches and wood beneath Yosh's platform. Now Yosh stepped down and and taking a burning limb from Jonna, reverently held the fire to the branch. In the name of God, I trade this artifact of science for the clean smoke of nature, he shouted. God will be done, replied the others. As the fire began to blaze up, Zack suddenly realized what this ceremony was about. The object which was beginning to char and then flame up on the pyre was a book. Late that afternoon, after Jonna gave Zack his treatment, Yash came in to sit with him. Jonna tells me that you are all but healed, he said. Now it's just a matter of getting back your strength. Yes, said Zack. I thank you again, both of you. I would have died. You very nearly did. Tell me, Yash, when you found me, was there anyone else nearby? The body of a man we knew as Ermil. That surprised Zack. He wondered what dealings Ermil could have with the traders. When Yash didn't speak again, Zack continued, trying to sound casual. Was there anyone else? A young girl, perhaps? Yash frowned in puzzlement. A girl? No. Why do you ask? My daughter was traveling with me, Zack said. When we encountered trouble, she ran off into the woods. We've had patrols in the area for weeks, said Yash. There has been no report of a girl traveling alone. When I'm stronger, I must try to find her. Yash didn't answer for a moment. Then, abruptly, he smiled. You must be curious about the ritual you witnessed this morning, he said. It was most interesting. It is more than interesting, said Yash. It is nothing less than the beginning of salvation of mankind, and I'm happy that we found you. We seldom get a chance to teach the truth to outsiders. Our sins began many thousands of years ago, Yash was explaining earnestly, when the first scientists chopped down the tree of knowledge to build an ark. They created the first change. Men have been changing the world ever since, and now we are paying for it. Some of those changes saved thousands of lives and reduced the suffering of millions, said Zack, exasperated. He had been talking to Yash for only a few minutes, but it seemed to him that the conversation had gone on for many hours, though through his fatigue, he felt a growing horror at everything Yash had to say. Yash was nodding sympathetically. You have been taught that, as have hundreds of generations. The truth, brother, is that those lives were not meant to be saved. Suffering exists only when we go against God's law. Men were not meant to live as they did before the change, in cities with tall buildings, depending on machines and chemicals for life. We are meant to live in nature, as God intended. Every little change is another step away from God. Only when the last traces of science are gone will he lift up his curse and call back the wild Dinas. You say all change is evil, said Zack, knowing even as he spoke that Yash would not listen. Yet you use manufactured weapons and build tents and eat with pottery implements like people everywhere. Yash didn't even look annoyed. We construct nothing, he said. We use what God puts in our path. And we only use those things that are helpful to us in spreading the truth. The rest, like the evil books, we destroy when we have completed our work and science has been defeated. We will not need the other things. If it weren't for books, said Zack, you would not know one thing about the history of mankind. We do not read books. Nevertheless, that is where all your knowledge of the past has come from. I know you can't help your beliefs, said Yash sadly, but eventually you will see the light. The truth is that all knowledge is within you, and as it is within each of us. Yash was speaking with such a sincerity, that Zack almost wished he could believe him. The young trader sat back and smiled. Enough talk of religion for now. It is your turn to speak for a while. I'd like you to tell me about the capital. Is it true, for example, that the men living there are required to shave and to bathe every day? Yash seemed as relaxed as if he and Zack were old friends. He was the only adult Zack had ever met who had no lines at all on his face. In some ways, he seemed as artless as a child, but Zack knew there must be shrewdness and ambition behind the simplicity. Of course, he would tell Yash as little as possible about the capital. Perhaps the traders were the harmless cultists they had seemed at first, but Zack was beginning to sense a growing danger, not just to the goals he and Will had worked for, but perhaps to the future of the race itself. He started to speak, but was not sure what to say. He did not know whether lies or the truth would be more harmful. After a moment, Yash spoke again. But I can see you're tired. Never mind. Rest now, and we'll talk another time. With a reassuring hand on Zack's shoulder, Yash rose to his feet and left the tent. Zack watched him go, though through the tent flap he could see trader men and women, content and purposeful building fires, cooking, talking, ending the day like people everywhere in the district. But to his nostrils, but in his nostrils was still the scent of burning books. Over the next several days, Zack continued to heal. When he could walk unassisted, he noticed that there was always one or two armed men just outside the tent. Although he had said nothing, Zack knew that Yash must have saved him for a reason, and that the reason would become clear soon enough. Meanwhile, Zack continued to witness the trader services each morning, noting with helpless despair that every day another book was destroyed and lost to mankind forever. And daily, he and Yash continued their talks after an hour or two each afternoon. For an hour or two after each afternoon. Okay. Typically, Yash would stroll into the tent, an open smile on his face, as if he were visiting a sick friend in the neighborhood. He would ask after Zack's health and sit and begin talking to him of trader beliefs. My first father was a minister of the old religion, Yash said. Yash told Zack one day, of what is called Christianity. Religion has been the vocation of our family for generations, even before the change. After the change, it continued. We lived in a small town high in the western mountains. My father had a flock of 10 families who would come to hear him read from a so-called holy book called the Bible. Science is so clever, you see, that it has clothed itself even in religion. Well, my father, in his ignorance, kept other books too, and even raised fowl in a cage he had constructed from the body of a dead machine. We didn't know any better. We thought it was as good a life as could be expected. And then my mother died of the woman's sickness. Her time had not even come. The pregnancy scarcely showed. Soon after, my younger brother and sister all became ill from eating a stew made of new plants. The child of our nearest neighbor also was attacked by a fox cat the same day, and he and all my brothers and sisters died on the next day in terrible agony. That night, my second father killed himself by drinking fireberry poison. Wow. The day after, my first father woke me early and made me watch while he destroyed everything inside the cabin. He threw plates and bowls to the floor. He pulled the wicks out of lamps and smashed their bodies against the stone fireplace. He ripped books in half and tore their pages into tiny pieces. He gathered the rubble of all the man-made things from outside and piled them in the center of the room. The last thing he put on the pile was the leather covering of the Bible, now torn into strips. He turned to me and explained what he had done. He told me many of the things I had told you, and made me understand that I must also undo the evils of the change, to trade all things made by science for the natural ones provided by God in his love. When he had finished speaking, my father took a coal from the fireplace and set the pile of rubble afire. He picked me up and brought me outside the cabin. When he turned and walked back into it, I never forgot his face. The look of suffering it had always held was gone. He was at peace. He didn't even cry out. I'm just going to check real quick. Okay, checking time real quick. I was young at the time, about 9 years old. I remember looking into the flames and seeing all those ungodly things being consumed in the clean fire. I knew immediately that God had spoken to me through my father, and that he wanted me to begin my life as a traitor in his service. I have been teaching his truths ever since. Zach had no answer. Yash's story was not unusual, except for his mystical conversation, his mystical conversion. The conclusions he had reached would undoubtedly seem reasonable to most of the people of the district. They sat in silence a moment, and Yash turned the conversation to Zach. "And you, brother," he said, "you come from a part of the world where there are many things left from before the change. Were your fathers too taken in by science?" "I didn't grow up in a town," said Zach, "and I never had even a first father." Yash raised his eyebrows. "But you have lived in the capital," he said. "Yes. You told me when we first found you that you are one of the principal's men. I am very curious about him. You know that he has built an empire on the ruins of a pre-changed city. We know that all the areas to the east belong to him, and we know that most of his people are godless and are made miserable by the wild Dinas, as are most men in the world today, but need not be once they understand the truth. What sort of man is the principal?" "A good man," said Zach. "A dedicated leader." "But misled by the devil," said Josh. "Of course, I have not visited the district except just across the border. I don't know what to expect in the capital." "You're planning to travel there?" "Perhaps," said Josh. "There is much to see and much to do in this world. Does the principal guard his streets with soldiers?" "Some streets," said Zach, "but truly, I have not been in the capital for a very long time." "Is he planning to extend the borders of the district?" "I can't tell you that either. Only the principal himself knows what his plans are." Josh shook his head and frowned. "I believe you know a great deal more than you are telling, and I wish for your own sake that you would tell me more." Zach could not help liking Yash. In spite of his beliefs, the young trader leader was intellectually quick and instinctively warm and generous. There was no question that his desire to obliterate all traces of science was sincere and based on the highest motives. There was also no question now that Yash represented a deadly threat to everything that Zach believed in. Daily, Zach was becoming stronger. He knew that he must watch for the right moment to escape and take his knowledge of the traders to the principal, no matter what the consequences. Though he was carefully guarded in some ways, Zach felt himself a part of the trader community. After services and the noontime meal, he and Yash often sat together in the tent or under the tree playing chess or talking. Yash was quite a good chess player, and Zach suspected more than once that the younger man had let him win to save his pride. Yeah. As they played, Jonah would often sit with them, kneading Yash's back with her strong hands, her misshapen face partly hidden by a thin scarf. She seldom had much to say, but seemed and did most, as did most women here, content. Seemed content. Okay. At moments like this, Zach too fell at peace, as if he had known these people all his life. Okay, wait. Okay, we still have time. Beneath the contentment, a more practical part of Zach knew that however much Yash liked him, the traders had not saved his life for the sake of friendship. He was not entirely surprised when, after Yash had gone on an extended trip to the heart of the trader empire, Galen and two other men took him early one morning into the woods, beyond sight or sound of the camp. They tied him securely in such a way that twisting the ropes put unbearable pressure on his joints of his fingers and wrists. As soon as Zach saw how the morning would go, he moved his center of consciousness into a quiet place deep within his mind, where he became a remote observer while Galen questioned him closely for several hours, asking the same questions under torture that Yash had asked him in friendship. In truth, there was very little Zach could tell them that they did not already know, and nothing that would prove immediately harmful to the principal. When they weren't, when they wanted, or what they wanted was simple confirmation that the Capitol was, in fact, a repository of much that remained from the old technology, that there were vast caches of ancient weapons in the principal's armory, and there was one great building and several lesser ones called libraries, all heavily guarded and containing hundreds of thousands of those symbols of pre-change evil printed books. It was only when Galen began questioning Zack about the garden that he had to think carefully before answering. He was forced to admit that the garden was indeed inhabited by women, and that they were under the informal protection of the principal. These facts could be readily ascertained from any of the small number of people living near the border. He denied vigorously again and again the rumors that science was practiced in the garden. Such rumors had understandably been prevalent in the area for years. Never before had they assumed such sinister significance. At last, Galen gave up, though Zack could tell he was not completely satisfied. He was able to return to camp on his own feet, though he knew it would be some time before he could use his hands again. Jonah calmly attended to him, first putting dislocated fingers back into place and setting 3 broken fingers into his right hand. She splinted each and wrapped them in wet leaves of a sort Zack had not seen, which shrunk as they dried, holding the splints in place. When she had finished, she applied soothing herb compresses to his swollen knuckles and wrists. "Where did you learn to use the use of healing herbs?" he asked her while she worked to distract his own mind. She looked up surprised. "It was something the women of my family have always known," she said. He hesitated, then spoke again. "You have always seemed to me different from the other traders. Are you a true believer?" Okay, we're going to have to stop that here. We've been reading Pandora's Genes. It is a book by Kathryn Lance. It is part of a trilogy. It is the first book of a trilogy. The second book being Pandora's Children, and the third being Pandora's Promise. Now, if you want to get copies of the book yourself, then it's in most big booksellers would probably have it. Anyways, if you like this content, then make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me in any way, all the information will be in the description below. Also, you can join the Discord server, and that information is down in the description as well. Anyways, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.